joined today by Bram Desmet. He is CEO and Managing Director of Belgium for Solventure. Bram, welcome.
Thank you, Bob.
Let's talk about this issue of leading indicator forecasting. Where are we in that area right now, and how might we improve our efforts?
Well, I see two things. First of all, I see that the forecasting challenge for manufacturing companies is increasing, right? Assume that you're a chemical company and you sell into automotive, you sell into construction, you sell into furniture, into footwear. So if you're a specialty company, you can really sell into different markets, and you do that on a global scale. So you sell into Russia, you sell into China, you sell into India, you sell into South America, you sell into North America. So imagine how to keep track of all these different markets, let's say regional markets or geographical markets, and then also markets of users moving at different speeds. So how do you keep in sync with the changes going out there? So that's a key challenge we see for a lot of our customers. And the second thing is that companies do buy a lot of external data on where the market is going, but it's used in a purely qualitative way. It's like if I'm the market manager for a certain application, I will look at reports and then qualitatively adjust the forecast. And the big opportunity we see is, well, to model that in a more statistical way and to build forecasting models which are not extrapolating the recent history like most of the statistical models are working, but to make models which use that external data to come to a much better forecast. That's really what we're up to.
Well, you're utilizing economic terminology when you use a phrase like leading indicator. Mm-hmm. So from a supply chain standpoint, what are these leading indicators that companies need to be looking at, and indeed you are looking at now?
Well, it's really company and sector specific, right? So today we focus on two types of markets: chemical companies and then suppliers to the automotive. So one of the projects we're running is a second-tier supplier to the automotive, right? And then you really look at, first of all, publicly available data, which is, how is automotive doing? What's the number of cars produced? What's the number of kilometers driven? You can feel that there is a certain dependency with oil price. And if you're delivering, for instance, to the tire manufacturers, it might also be that there is a certain link with other components going into the tires, like what's rubber, what's carbon black, so what's steel cord. So all of these different factors are typically freely available and can be used. Next to that, most companies, they buy data from private data providers. And there is also a big opportunity because companies typically know one or two or three of these providers, but there is many more. So next to using that data that the company is already buying, being a data broker, and making sure that you can prove to them, like, if you would buy this or that data from that or that provider, that would also help you to improve your forecast with that percentage accuracy. All of these are the things that we are currently looking in. And part of it is standard databases, but part is also really company-specific data which needs to be bought.
A lot of this data you're talking about sounds awfully nebulous, like hard to kind of get your mind around and interpret it. Is this a human effort, or is this an analytical effort, or is it an IT effort in terms of making sense of all this data and translating it into truly accurate forecasts?
Excellent question, and I see two extremes. On the one hand, you could build a black box model which comes up with, let us say, 20 or 30 or 50 indicators which are delivering a certain prediction of a certain level of aggregation in a certain regional market. But that really creates a black box, so that goes well as long as the forecast is pointing in the right direction. If something goes wrong, people will distrust the model because it's a black box. So I'm a big fan of doing that step by step and making sure that the two or three primary indicators are indicators where the causal relationship is also easily understood. And we typically also do an exercise with the company where we say, well, what do you expect? What are the drivers you expect will be affecting your business? And then they come up with 5 or 10 parameters which they expect that will have an influence. And what we can do using statistics and say, well, out of the 10, Yeah, maybe there's 3 or 4 which are really relevant. Yeah. There's 3 or 4 where we don't find a strong relationship, yeah. And maybe there's even 3 or 4 where there is no relationship at all. So on the one hand, you can help them to better understand the gut feeling they have on what drives the business. And we also do what we call a brute force statistics analysis, where we just run the data or their sales data against a full full database of indicators, and we easily bring up 2 or 3 or 4 extra relationships which they were not necessarily aware of, yeah? And which kind of triggers a new discussion and a new debate. Yeah? And some of them will be understood and become intuitive, and some might even not be. Yeah? So that's an exercise we go through to, in the end, come up with a limited set of indicators where we say, well, this probably explains a lot of the variance in your sales patterns. These are the primary drivers. Yeah? And if you then really want to fine-tune the model and you want to add 10 or 15 extra to get the last couple of percentages of accuracy out, that's fine. But at least you have a better understanding of what are the main drivers behind the model.
So how do you go about matching sales data with these external indicators? Is that a challenge?
It's statistically a challenge because if you start pulling in data, it's very easy to get 1 to 2 or 3 million indicators, right? 10 years ago, economic indicators, well, you were lucky if you had them on a quarterly basis, and the data of quarter 1 was available like in quarter 3, yeah? And today it's amazing how much data is available on a relatively low level of granularity, and how accurate and how fast the data is available. So it's challenging in the sense that it's a big data problem, yeah? But it's really big data on the tactical horizon, 3 to 18 months out. So it's not the short-term demand sensing, it's more like the mid to long-term demand sensing that we're doing here. And so it's statistically challenging, yeah? But if you think about it twice, it's amazing that not more companies are doing this today, because we don't do that on a customer SKU level, yeah? Because you don't find, let's say, economic trends there. You do it on an aggregated level. So even for complex companies, you might be talking about anywhere between 10 to 30 time series. So analyzing 10 to 30 time series from that perspective is not very complex, right? And also having discussions with companies around that, well, you need to discuss 10 or 30, but you don't need to discuss 100 or 300 time series.
Is that why you think that companies aren't doing it? They're intimidated and they think they need to be dealing with more indicators than they actually do? I mean, what's holding them back from fully embracing this type of model?
Good question. My feeling is a lack of knowledge. There's a lot of talk in companies about big data and about the digital economy and the digital enterprise, and I see it's a priority really on the strategic level. And but they don't have, if they have analytical competences, they look for the typical applications, and the typical applications would be like in, I don't know, shopping basket analysis or a promotion analysis. It's more on customer analysis rather than on a forecast analysis, which is more a time series of analysis. And a second element might be that next to S&OP or supply chain, I also see a lot of interest in the sales community for this topic, because in general, sales does not like to participate in the forecast. Why? They just key in numbers and they're frustrated because they give in the right number and they don't have the product for some reason or another. So, and this type of forecasting is different, because it explains the demand drivers. Yeah? And a salesperson, if he has a better understanding of what is driving the market and where the market is going, well, he can better anticipate, and he can better also, if I know that automotive will be slow, then maybe I need to do more effort on footwear or on another market to compensate for that. So there's a big interest also in that community, but the sales community is a less technical community compared to the supply chain community. So certainly also there, we see a huge interest, but there is a lack of, let us say, the technical competence to statistically get it done in the right way.
Mm-hmm. Although I'm sure you're optimistic that we'll see more advances in this area, that more companies will take on this this model.
My personal belief is that we will see the field of forecasting drastically changing over the next 5 years, right? where over the last 30 years in forecasting the competition was on who has the best technique, right? And softwares were compared on, oh, this software has 30 techniques and this software has 100 techniques. In the future it will be on who has the best data, right? And who is able to make best use of that data. So even with relatively simple regression techniques, there's already a lot you can do. And the challenge then of course becomes like, okay, you need to collect all the data, which is an effort. And you need more advanced statistical models if you really want to tackle the big data problem. So, but that's where we as a company will focus on. That's our development. That's building the database, building statistical models to make sense out of that data. And I see some of the really big companies, let's say the plus 30 billion companies, I see that they have their analytics teams and they will put 2 or 3 PhDs on this problem. And let's say they might have the means to develop this type of models by themselves. But there will be a huge opportunity for us as a company in the mid-market on companies where it will be much more wiser instead of trying to this type of developments themselves and collecting all of the data themselves to use companies like Solventure and use the software solutions we are developing to help them the problem.
Bram, I want to thank you so much for helping us to understand this really promising area of using leading indicators to aid in forecasting. Thank you very much for being with us.
You're most welcome. Thank you.
I have been speaking with Bram Desmet of Solventure. Thank you very much for watching.